Emma wiped her hands on her apron, brushing off the last crumbs of pita bread. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the city streets awash in neon lights and the faint hum of passing traffic. Her food truck, Shawarma Bliss, was parked at its usual corner, a beacon for late-night diners. Business had been slow tonight, but Emma didn't mind. She enjoyed the quiet moments, the rhythm of slicing meat, and the aromatic spices filling the air. As she closed the cash register, she noticed a figure lingering near the curb. He stood under a flickering street lamp, his shoulders hunched against the cold. His coat was worn and frayed, the kind that had seen one too many winters. He didn't approach the truck, just glanced at it occasionally before looking away. Emma hesitated for a moment before calling out, "Hey there, you hungry?" The man looked up, startled, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hood. "Oh, no. I'm fine," he said, his voice soft but firm. Emma wasn't convinced. She had seen plenty of people like him, prideful, even in tough times. "It's on the house," she insisted, smiling warmly. "Best shawarma in town, I promise." The man hesitated, his gaze shifting between her and the menu board above her head. Finally, he stepped closer. "If it's no trouble, I wouldn't say no to something warm." "Trouble? This is what I do," Emma replied, already preparing a fresh shawarma. She spread the pita, layered it with seasoned chicken, fresh vegetables, and her secret garlic sauce, wrapping it tightly. As she handed it over, she added a steaming cup of tea. "Can't have shawarma without tea," she said. The man accepted the food with a slight nod. "Thank you," he murmured, taking a cautious bite. His eyes widened slightly. "This is amazing." Emma grinned, leaning against the counter. "Told you. So what's your name?" "Jake," he said between bites. "And you're?" "Emma, owner, chef, and cashier of this fine establishment." She gestured to the food truck with mock grandeur. "What about you, Jake? What brings you to this corner of the world?" Jake chuckled softly, his laugh more like a sigh. "Just passing through." Emma tilted her head, curious but not pressing. "Well, Jake, consider this your lucky stop. First-time customers get free food on rainy nights. It's my rule." "Generous rule," Jake said, his tone light but his eyes thoughtful. "Not many people would do that." Emma shrugged. "The way I see it, everyone's got a story, and sometimes a warm meal can make a bad day a little better." Jake finished his shawarma and set the empty paper wrap on the counter. "You're a rare kind of person, Emma." "Don't go flattering me now," she said, laughing. "I might start charging you for the next one." Jake smiled for the first time, a genuine, albeit faint, smile that softened the wariness in his face. "If all your food is this good, I might just take that risk." "Well, don't be a stranger," Emma said as he turned to leave. "You know where to find me." Jake paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Thanks again, Emma, for everything." As he disappeared into the night, Emma watched him go, a strange feeling settling in her chest. There was something different about Jake, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Shrugging it off, she turned back to her truck, ready to clean up for the night. But the memory of his tired eyes and quiet gratitude lingered. The next evening, Emma parked her food truck at the same corner, setting up for another night of serving her regulars and the occasional stranger. The city buzzed with life, but her thoughts drifted to Jake. She couldn't shake the image of his tired eyes and the way he seemed so grateful for something as simple as a warm meal. As she adjusted the skewers of meat, a familiar figure approached from the shadows. Jake, in his worn coat and scuffed boots, stood with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Back for round two?" Emma called out with a teasing grin. Jake gave a half smile, his eyes lighting up just a bit. "I couldn't resist. You did say not to be a stranger." "Well, I did mean it," she replied, already reaching for a fresh pita. "The usual?" Jake hesitated, glancing at the menu board. "Actually, I'd like to pay this time. You've done enough." Emma waved him off, her hands busy layering meat and veggies. "Consider it my treat again. Besides, you've got a long way to go before you hit regular customer status." "Emma," Jake said, his tone more serious now, "I appreciate it, but I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." She stopped mid-slice, looking up at him. "Jake, listen. I do this because I want to. And if you really feel bad about it, you can repay me by telling me something about yourself. Deal?" Jake blinked, caught off guard. "You drive a hard bargain." "Comes with the territory," she said, wrapping up his shawarma and handing it over. "So, what's your story?" Jake took a slow bite, buying himself time. "Not much to tell," he said finally. I've been traveling, trying to figure some things out. Emma raised an eyebrow. That's vague. Come on, you've got to give me more than that. Jake chuckled softly. All right, fine. I used to have a job that kept me tied to a desk. One day, I realized I needed a change, so I left. Sold everything, packed a bag, and started walking. Just like that? Emma asked, her interest piqued. Just like that, Jake replied, though his tone hinted at more. Sometimes you need to step away to see things clearly. Emma leaned on the counter, studying him. And? Have you seen things clearly yet? Jake smirked, his eyes glinting. Not quite, but I did find the best shawarma in the city, so I must be doing something right. Emma laughed, shaking her head. Smooth answer, Jake. Real smooth. As the night wore on, Jake stayed longer than he had the previous evening. He helped Emma carry supplies, wiped down counters, and even chatted with a few customers. Despite his quiet demeanor, he had a way of putting people at ease. When the last customer left and the street grew quiet, Emma sat on the food truck step, sipping her tea. Jake stood nearby, gazing at the city skyline. You know, she said, breaking the silence. You're a mystery, Jake, but you're not a bad one. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved. Emma narrowed her eyes playfully. That sounds like something someone with a big secret would say. Jake smiled faintly but didn't reply. As the clock struck midnight, he helped her close up the truck. Before leaving, he paused and said, Thanks again, Emma, for everything. You keep saying that like it's a big deal, she replied, locking the door. It is, Jake said simply, his voice carrying an honesty that made her pause. As he walked away, Emma watched him disappear into the city's glow, the same strange feeling from the night before returning. There was more to Jake than he was letting on, and she couldn't help but wonder what secrets he carried. The next few weeks passed in a blur of sizzling grills, bustling customers, and Jake's quiet but steady presence. True to his word, he became a regular at Shawarma Bliss. He arrived every evening, sometimes helping Emma set up, sometimes staying late to clean up. Their conversations grew longer, their banter sharper, and their silences more comfortable. One evening, as Emma flipped the open sign to closed, she turned to Jake with a mischievous grin. All right, Mr. Mystery Man, it's time for 20 questions. Jake, who was wiping down the counter, raised an eyebrow. 20 questions? Isn't that a bit much? Not when you've been dodging every real question for weeks, she countered, crossing her arms. Come on, don't be a chicken. Jake smirked, leaning against the counter. Fine, but I get to ask you questions too. Fair's fair. Deal. Emma grabbed a stool and sat down, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. First question. Where are you from? Originally, Seattle, Jake said, surprising her with the first straightforward answer he'd given. Emma nodded. Okay, Seattle. What's your favorite food, besides shawarma, obviously? Easy, spaghetti carbonara, Jake said, his lips curving into a rare, relaxed smile. My mom used to make it every Sunday. All right, I'll give you that one. Your turn, Emma said, gesturing for him to ask. Jake tilted his head, studying her. Why a food truck? Why not a restaurant? Emma leaned back, her smile softening. A food truck was affordable. A restaurant, well, that's the dream. But for now, this little truck is my kingdom. Ambitious, Jake said, nodding approvingly. I like that. Your turn again, Emma said quickly, steering the focus back to him. What's the best trip you've ever taken? Jake paused, his expression shifting. The one I'm on now. Emma blinked, caught off guard. You mean wandering around the city? He nodded. It's not about the destination, Emma. It's about what you learn along the way. She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. Okay, philosopher, your turn. Jake thought for a moment, then asked, What's your biggest regret? Emma's smile faltered. She looked down, fiddling with the edge of her apron. Not taking a chance on myself sooner. I waited too long to start this food truck. I let fear hold me back. Jake's voice softened. But you did it. That's what matters. Emma looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. Yeah, I guess you're right. They fell into a companionable silence, the city's distant hum filling the air. All right, Jake said after a moment. Last question for tonight. What's your dream restaurant like? Emma's face lit up. Oh, it would be cozy with warm lighting and big windows. A place where people feel at home, you know? I'd have dishes from all over, but everything would feel personal, like it was made just for them. Jake smiled, imagining it. Sounds like the kind of place people wouldn't want to leave. That's the idea, Emma said, her voice brimming with hope. Jake glanced at his watch and straightened. I should get going. Thanks for indulging my questions. Hey, you answered a few of mine too, Emma teased, standing up. Be careful out there. Jake nodded but hesitated before leaving. Emma, don't let anything stop you from building that dream. His words lingered long after he disappeared into the night. Emma cleaned the truck in thoughtful silence, her mind replaying their conversation. For all his quiet mystery, Jake had a way of saying things that stayed with her. As she locked up for the night, Emma made a silent vow. One day, she would open that restaurant, and maybe, just maybe, Jake would be there to see it. The city was alive that evening, bathed in golden streetlights and the hum of distant music from a nearby park. Emma's food truck had a steady line of customers, but her thoughts kept drifting to Jake, who hadn't shown up yet. Looking for someone? Teased Maria, a regular customer who had become something of a friend. Emma snapped out of her thoughts, flushing slightly. What? No, just making sure I don't run out of garlic sauce. Maria smirked knowingly. Sure, sure. Well, if the tall, scruffy guy does show up, tell him Maria says hi. As if summoned by her words, Jake appeared moments later, his usual worn coat contrasting sharply with the bright lights of the city. He carried a small bouquet of daisies, their petals slightly wilted but still charming. Sorry I'm late, Jake said, holding out the flowers awkwardly. I thought these might brighten up the truck. Emma blinked in surprise, then took the flowers with a smile. Daisies, huh? Fancy. Trying to class up my little food truck, are you? Jake chuckled, his shoulders relaxing. Maybe a little. Did I miss the dinner rush? Just barely. You've got impeccable timing as always, Emma replied, pulling out a jar to place the daisies in. She set them on the counter, their cheerful presence a welcome addition. Jake leaned against the counter, watching her work. You're always so busy. Do you ever take a break? Emma scoffed, tossing a slice of tomato into the trash. Breaks are for people who don't have rent to pay. Besides, I like staying busy. Jake frowned slightly. You shouldn't burn yourself out. Even superheroes need a day off. Superhero? Emma laughed, turning to face him. If I'm a superhero, what's my power? Perfect shawarma making? That, and making people feel like they matter, Jake said softly. The words caught her off guard, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. Well, she said finally, brushing a strand of hair from her face, that's a power I can live with. As the night wound down, the crowd thinned, leaving Emma and Jake alone. He helped her clean up, their movements synchronized from weeks of working together. Do you ever wish you'd done something else? Jake asked suddenly, his voice thoughtful. Emma paused, wiping her hands on a towel. Sometimes, when things are hard, I wonder if I should have taken the easy route, gotten a boring office job, maybe? Jake smiled faintly. I can't picture you behind a desk. Me neither, Emma admitted. What about you? Do you ever regret walking away from whatever it is you left behind? Jake hesitated, his gaze drifting to the city skyline. Not really. It wasn't making me happy. I just needed a change. Emma studied him, sensing the weight behind his words. Whatever you left, it must have been big. Jake met her eyes, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Big doesn't always mean better. The silence that followed wasn't awkward but charged, as if both were waiting for the other to say something more. Finally, Emma broke the tension with a small laugh. You know, for someone who's so good at dodging questions, you're surprisingly easy to talk to. Jake smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. And for someone who works nonstop, you're surprisingly easy to listen to. Careful, Emma said, pointing a finger at him. Keep that up, and I might start thinking you like me. Jake's smile didn't waver. What if I do? The air between them shifted, the playful banter giving way to something deeper. Emma opened her mouth to respond, but a honking car snapped them back to reality. Well, she said, clearing her throat, I guess you'll just have to keep coming back if you want to prove it. Jake grinned, stepping back toward the sidewalk. Challenge accepted. As he disappeared into the night, Emma touched the jar of daisies, their bright petals a stark contrast to the dark city beyond. For the first time in a long while, she felt the spark of something unexpected, a connection that made the long days and late nights worth it. She smiled to herself, locking up the truck. Whatever was happening between her and Jake, she wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew she wasn't ready to let it go. The line outside Shawarma Bliss was unusually long that evening, a testament to Emma's growing popularity. Jake stood at the side of the truck, helping her carry supplies from the back. He had become an unofficial part of the operation, much to the delight of Emma's regular customers. As he set down a box of fresh pita bread, two young men in tailored suits stepped up to the counter, smirking. "Hey, Emma," one of them called, loud enough to catch everyone's attention. "Looks like you've got some interesting help tonight." Emma turned, her brows knitting together. "What can I get for you, Mark?" Mark ignored her question, pointing his chin at Jake. "Didn't know you were hiring. I mean, it's cool. Everyone deserves a second chance, right?" Jake tensed but said nothing, keeping his eyes on the box in front of him. Emma crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "If you're here to order food, then order. Otherwise, you can leave." Mark chuckled, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, Emma. Just making conversation." He leaned in slightly. "You're too good, you know that? Always helping people like him. You should aim higher." The second man laughed, nudging Mark. "Yeah, maybe you'll get lucky, and he'll pay you back someday." Emma slammed her tongues down on the counter, her face flushed with anger. "Get out of here. Now." The laughter died, and the two men exchanged uneasy glances before muttering under their breath and walking away. Jake stood frozen, his shoulders stiff. Emma turned to him, her voice softer now. "Jake, I'm sorry. They're idiots." He shook his head, forcing a smile. "It's fine. I'm used to it." Emma frowned, her frustration clear. "You shouldn't have to be. People like that don't know anything about you. And even if they did, it doesn't give them the right to act like jerks." Jake met her gaze, his smile faltering. "You don't know much about me either, Emma." The words stung more than she expected. She opened her mouth to respond, but a customer called out, interrupting the moment. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned, Jake stayed behind to help clean up as usual. But the easy rhythm between them was gone, replaced by an uneasy silence. "Are you okay?" Emma asked finally, wiping down the counter. Jake sighed, leaning against the truck. "I appreciate what you did back there, but you don't have to fight my battles, Emma." She stopped, her hands resting on the counter. "It wasn't a battle. It was standing up for what's right. Why does that bother you?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. "Because it makes me feel like I'm exactly what they think I am. Like I can't handle it myself." Emma's voice softened. "Jake, everyone needs someone in their corner sometimes. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "You're too good, Emma. You see the best in people, even when you shouldn't." "Maybe," she said, holding his gaze. "Or maybe I just see the truth." Jake sighed, his shoulders slumping. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," she said firmly. "You're a good person, Jake. Whatever you're running from or hiding, it doesn't change that." He flinched at her words, but before he could respond, she added, "And if you want to prove me wrong, go ahead, but I don't think you will." For a moment, he just stared at her, his walls crumbling ever so slightly. Then, without another word, he grabbed his coat and walked off into the night. Emma watched him go, her heart heavy. She didn't know why he was so guarded, but she was determined to find out. For now, all she could do was hope that Jake would come back, ready to let her in. As she locked up the truck, she glanced at the daisies he'd brought her earlier in the week, their petals still bright and cheerful. Despite the tension, she couldn't help but smile. Jake might be a mystery, but he was a mystery worth solving. It was another quiet night at Shawarma Bliss, the kind Emma usually appreciated. But tonight, her mind wandered, replaying her last conversation with Jake. He hadn't shown up for 3 days, and though she wouldn't admit it out loud, she missed him. The food truck felt emptier without his quiet presence and easy banter. She was about to close up when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, scanning the street before approaching the truck. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement, and his air of authority felt out of place in this corner of the city. "Good evening," the man said, his tone crisp. "I'm looking for Jacob Hastings. Have you seen him?" Emma blinked, confused. "Who?" The man frowned slightly, pulling out his phone and showing her a photo. Emma's breath caught. It was Jake, looking entirely different. In the picture, he wore an expensive suit, his hair neatly styled, and his expression serious. "That's Jake," she said slowly, trying to mask her surprise. "Why are you looking for him?" The man raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. Jake? That's an interesting alias. He's the CEO of Hastings Tech. We've been trying to reach him for weeks. Do you know where he is? Emma shook her head, her heart racing. No idea, sorry. The man sighed, slipping his phone back into his pocket. If you see him, let him know his team needs him back. His disappearing act has gone on long enough. With that, the man turned and walked back to his car, leaving Emma standing frozen behind the counter. Jake showed up an hour later, his usual casual demeanor unchanged, as if nothing had happened. Emma's eyes narrowed as she watched him approach. You're late, she said, her tone sharper than usual. Jake tilted his head, sensing her mood. Everything okay? Funny you should ask, Emma replied, crossing her arms. A guy in a suit came by earlier. Said he's looking for someone named Jacob Hastings. Know anything about that? Jake froze, his expression shifting from confusion to guilt in an instant. Emma, I can explain. Can you? She shot back, her voice rising. Because I'd love to hear why you've been pretending to be someone you're not. He ran a hand through his hair, looking everywhere but at her. It's not what you think. Then what is it? Emma demanded. You've been coming here for weeks, acting like some drifter, and now I find out you're some big shot CEO? Do you have any idea how humiliating that feels? Humiliating? Jake looked genuinely hurt. Emma, I never meant to deceive you. I needed to get away from my life for a while, to figure things out. And you thought playing the part of a homeless guy was the best way to do that? She snapped. It wasn't about playing a part, Jake said, his voice pleading. I wanted to see the world differently, to meet people who wouldn't care about my money or my title. And I found you. Emma's heart twisted, but she refused to let her guard down. You could have told me the truth. I would have understood. I was scared, Jake admitted, his voice dropping. I didn't want to lose what we had. You're the only person who's treated me like me. Not Jacob Hastings, the CEO. Just Jake. Emma looked away, her emotions a whirlwind of anger and confusion. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. Jake stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. Emma, I know I've made mistakes, but everything I've said to you, everything I've done, it's been real. Please believe that. She met his gaze, searching for any sign of deceit. All she saw was sincerity and regret. Give me some time, she said finally, her voice trembling. I need to think. Jake nodded, his shoulders slumping. I'll give you all the time you need. Just don't shut me out completely. Emma didn't reply, watching as he walked away, his figure disappearing into the night. As she locked up the truck, Emma's thoughts swirled. Jake's confession had shaken her, but deep down, she couldn't deny the connection they shared. The question was, could she forgive him for the lie and let herself trust him again? The daisies on the counter swayed gently in the evening breeze, their bright petals a quiet reminder of the man who had brought them. The following week passed in a haze for Emma. She kept herself busy, pouring every ounce of energy into her food truck, but no amount of sizzling meat or wrapping shawarmas could distract her from the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Jake hadn't come by since their confrontation, and though she tried to convince herself she didn't care, she found herself glancing toward the corner where he usually appeared. One evening, as Emma cleaned the counters, a knock on the truck's side door startled her. She turned to see Jake standing there, looking more put together than she'd ever seen him. His coat was new, his hair neatly combed, and he held a box in his hands. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. I needed to see you, Jake said, stepping inside before she could protest. He placed the box on the counter, his movements careful, almost nervous. And I needed to explain. Emma crossed her arms, keeping her distance. You had plenty of chances to explain. Why now? Jake sighed, running a hand over the back of his neck. Because I realized something. I've spent so much time running from my life, from the expectations, from the people who only care about what I can give them. And then I met you. For the first time in years, I felt like I could just be myself. I didn't want to ruin that. You didn't think lying to me would ruin it? Emma shot back, her frustration bubbling over. I wasn't trying to lie, Jake said quickly. I just wanted to be Jake, not Jacob Hastings. I thought I could keep the two separate, but I was wrong. And I'm sorry, Emma. Truly. Emma's eyes softened, despite herself, but she wasn't ready to let him off the hook. So, what now? You disappear again? Or do you stick around and face the mess you've made? Jake smiled faintly. I'm here to face it. starting with this. He opened the box, revealing a brand new sign for her food truck. The words Shawarma Bliss were etched in elegant, bold lettering with her logo in gold. Emma stared at it, her breath catching. You bought me a sign? I commissioned it, Jake said. You told me your dream is to open a restaurant someday. I wanted to remind you that you're already building something incredible. Her heart ached at the gesture, but she forced herself to stay guarded. You think a fancy sign makes up for everything? Jake shook his head. No, it doesn't. But it's a start. And I want to keep proving to you that I'm not the man you think I am, or the man I was when I first showed up here. Emma studied him, her emotions a whirlwind. Part of her wanted to push him away, to guard her heart from more disappointment. But another part of her, a bigger part, wanted to believe him. You can't just throw money at people and expect it to fix things, Jake, she said quietly. I know, he said, stepping closer. That's why I'm not just giving you a sign. I'm giving you the truth, the whole truth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, placing it on the counter. This is everything you might want to know about me. My real name, my company, even my net worth. If you have questions, I'll answer them honestly. Emma stared at the paper, her hands trembling. Why are you doing this? Because I don't want to lose you, Jake said simply. You're the only person who's ever seen me for who I am, even when I wasn't being honest. I can't walk away from that, not without trying to make it right. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. This doesn't mean I forgive you, Jake. I know, he said, his voice steady, but it's a step, and I'll keep taking steps for as long as it takes. Emma hesitated, then unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the information, his name, his company, the sheer magnitude of his wealth. It was overwhelming. But beneath it all, she saw the man she had come to know. Finally, she looked up at him, her voice trembling. If I let you stay in my life, there can't be any more secrets, no more lies. Jake nodded, his expression earnest. No more lies, I promise. Emma took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing on her. All right, Jake, let's see if you can keep that promise. For the first time in days, Jake smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that made Emma's heart ache in the best way. As he helped her pack up for the night, the new sign resting safely in the truck, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something worth holding on to. The next few days felt like walking a tightrope for Emma. Jake kept his word and stayed close, helping at the truck and trying to make amends. Yet, something between them had shifted. The easy rhythm they'd shared was gone, replaced by careful words and unspoken tension. More onions, or are we good? Jake asked one afternoon, holding up a fresh batch he'd chopped. Emma glanced at him from the grill, her tone clipped. That's enough. Jake hesitated, then set the onions down, his jaw tightening. He was trying, but Emma's walls were still firmly in place. A regular customer, Maria, watched the exchange from her spot near the counter. Once Jake stepped away to clean, she leaned in toward Emma. What's going on with you two? Maria asked in a low voice. Emma sighed, flipping a pita on the grill. It's complicated. Complicated how? Maria pressed. Because from where I'm standing, he looks like a guy trying really hard to fix whatever he broke. Emma paused, her grip tightening on the spatula. He lied to me, Maria, about everything. How am I supposed to trust someone after that? Maria shrugged, taking a bite of her shawarma. Depends. Do you think he lied to hurt you? Or because he was scared you'd push him away? Emma didn't answer. The truth was, she wasn't sure anymore. That evening, after closing the truck, Jake lingered as Emma cleaned up. The quiet between them was heavy, the sound of scrubbing and clinking utensils filling the space. Emma, Jake said finally, his voice hesitant. She didn't look up. What? I feel like no matter what I do, I can't fix this, he admitted, his tone raw. Emma straightened, turning to face him. Because some things can't just be fixed, Jake. You can't undo a lie with good intentions. I know that, Jake said, stepping closer. But I'm not asking for instant forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to prove that what we had, what we still have, is real. Emma crossed her arms, her voice trembling with frustration. You don't get it, do you? I opened up to you. I trusted you. And you? I didn't mean to betray you, Jake interrupted, his voice rising. I didn't know how to tell you the truth without losing what we had. Well, congratulations, Emma said bitterly. You managed to lose it anyway. Jake flinched, the words cutting deep. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Jake broke the silence, his tone softer. Do you remember what you told me that night? About your dream restaurant? Emma blinked, caught off guard. What does that have to do with anything? You said you wanted a place where people felt like they belonged, Jake said, where they didn't have to pretend to be something they're not. That's what you gave me, Emma, a place to belong, and I ruined it. Her throat tightened, and she looked away, blinking back tears. Jake, I don't know if I can give that back to you. Not after everything. Jake nodded slowly, his expression resigned. I understand, but if you ever decide you can, I'll be here, as long as it takes. He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing against the pavement. Emma watched him go, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. That night, Emma sat alone in her small apartment, the daisies Jake had given her sitting in a jar on the kitchen table. Their petals were starting to wilt, but they still held a quiet beauty, a reminder of the man who had brought them into her life. She wanted to be angry, to hold on to her hurt and disappointment. But as she stared at the flowers, she couldn't ignore the part of her that missed Jake, the part that wanted to believe he could be the man she thought he was. With a deep breath, Emma made a silent vow. If Jake truly meant what he said, he'd have to prove it. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to trust him again. But not yet. Not until she was ready. For now, all she could do was wait and see if the bond they'd shared could ever be repaired. The days turned into weeks, and Emma began to find her routine again. The food truck thrived as usual, though she couldn't deny the absence of Jake left a strange emptiness. She busied herself with work, convincing herself she didn't need him to succeed. But her heart had other ideas. One late afternoon, as she prepped for the evening rush, a delivery driver approached the truck with a clipboard and a large box. Emma Carter? He asked. That's me, she replied, wiping her hands on her apron and signing for the package. What is this? No idea, the driver said with a shrug. Just told to bring it here. Have a good night. Emma carried the box inside the truck, curiosity bubbling as she opened it. Inside were neatly packed supplies, new serving trays, utensils, and high-quality containers. At the bottom was an envelope with her name on it. She opened it cautiously, her heart skipping as she read the note. For the best shawarma in the city, you deserve the best too, Jay. Emma's emotions were a whirlwind. She wanted to be angry, angry that Jake was still finding ways to be a part of her life without confronting her directly. But she couldn't ignore the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. Later that week, Emma noticed something unusual at her usual parking spot. A city official stood by the curb, attaching a new sign. Premium vendor parking reserved for shawarma bliss. Emma stared, dumbfounded. Excuse me, she called out. What's this about? The official turned, smiling. Your permit's been upgraded. Looks like you've got a good friend looking out for you. Emma felt a wave of frustration mixed with gratitude. She didn't need Jake's help, but the upgrade was undeniably a boost for her business. Maria appeared out of nowhere, her keen eyes catching Emma's conflicted expression. Let me guess, you're mystery millionaire? Emma sighed, leaning against the truck. He's trying to make up for everything, but he's doing it in all the wrong ways. Maria crossed her arms. Wrong ways? Sounds like he's doing pretty damn well if you ask me. It's not about the money, Emma said, her voice low. I don't know what to feel anymore. Maria gave her a knowing look. Then maybe it's time you stopped overthinking and started feeling. That evening, as Emma packed up, she noticed Jake standing across the street. He wasn't approaching, just watching, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Her heart clenched at the sight of him, but she forced herself to keep working, ignoring the tug to call him over. When she finished, she found a small folded note tucked under the windshield wiper of her truck. Emma, I don't want to interfere or overstep. I just want to help you the way you helped me. You gave me a second chance at being myself. I owe you more than I can ever repay. Jake. Emma's resolve finally cracked. She drove home, the note sitting on the passenger seat, her mind racing. The next day, Emma made a decision. She called Jake. When he answered, his voice was cautious. Emma, meet me at the park by my truck's spot, she said, keeping her tone neutral. We need to talk. Jake arrived within 20 minutes, looking as nervous as she'd ever seen him. He approached cautiously, hands in his pockets, waiting for her to speak first. You've been busy, Emma said, crossing her arms. Jake nodded, his expression serious. I didn't mean to overstep. I just wanted to help. You don't get to decide what I need, Jake, she said firmly. I appreciate what you've done, but you can't buy my trust back. Jake flinched but nodded. I know, and I'm not trying to. I wanted to show you that I care, that I'm sorry. Emma took a deep breath, her tone softening. Jake, I don't need your money or your gifts. I need honesty. I need to know that when you're here, it's because you want to be, not because you feel guilty. Jake stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. Emma, I'm here because I can't imagine not being in your life. You mean more to me than anyone has in a long time, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you. Her heart ached at his words, but she forced herself to stay strong. Then stop trying so hard. Just be you. No more grand gestures, no more secrets. If you want to be a part of my life, you need to earn that place back. Jake nodded, his expression earnest. I will. No more secrets, no more lies. Just me, Jake, whoever that is. Emma studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. All right, let's see where this goes, but don't mess it up this time. Jake smiled, relief washing over his face. I won't. I promise. As they sat on a nearby bench talking until the sun set, Emma felt the first glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had lost. The park was alive with the hum of life. Children laughed into the distance, couples strolled hand in hand, and the occasional street performer played a soft melody on a guitar. Emma sat on a bench near her usual food truck spot, watching as Jake carefully set up a small folding table between them. What's this? Emma asked, arching a brow as he spread a red checkered tablecloth over it. Jake grinned, his boyish charm peeking through. Dinner? I figured it's time I return the favor for all the shawarma you've given me. Emma crossed her arms, amused but skeptical. You're not exactly dressed for chef duties. Jake gestured to the takeout bags he'd brought, his grin widening. Let's just say I outsourced the cooking, but the sentiment is the same. Emma couldn't help but laugh. All right, Hastings, let's see what you've got. He unpacked the bags, revealing dishes from a local Italian restaurant, spaghetti carbonara, garlic bread, and a small tiramisu for dessert. Emma's eyes widened. You remembered, she said softly. Jake looked up, his smile softening. Of course I did. Carbonara's your favorite, right? No, Emma teased, smirking. It's yours. Mine's still shawarma, but nice try. Jake groaned, shaking his head. Well, at least it's good food. Sit, eat, and let me redeem myself. They dug into the meal, the awkwardness that had hung over them for weeks slowly dissolving with every bite. Conversation flowed more easily, their laughter blending with the sounds of the park. All right, Emma said, wiping her hands on a napkin. I'll admit, this is nice. But you know this doesn't mean you're off the hook, right? Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. I know, and I'm not expecting anything. I just wanted to remind you that I'm not going anywhere. Emma studied him, her heart torn between caution and the undeniable warmth his presence brought. You're persistent, I'll give you that. Jake chuckled. Comes with the territory. Running a company teaches you a thing or two about not giving up. Her gaze softened. Speaking of your company, are you ever going back? Or is hiding out with me your new full-time gig? Jake hesitated, his playful demeanor fading. I don't know yet. Being with you has shown me what I've been missing, the simple, honest parts of life. But I also know I can't run forever. I'll have to face it eventually. Emma nodded slowly. And when you do? He met her eyes, his voice steady. I'll make sure it doesn't take me away from you. The sincerity in his tone made her heart ache, but she forced herself to stay guarded. You say that now, but you live in a different world, Jake, one that's so far from mine. Jake leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. Emma, my world doesn't mean anything without people like you in it. I've had money, success, and all the things people think they want, but none of it compares to what I've found here, with you. Her breath caught, but she quickly masked her emotions with a sarcastic quip. Wow, you're laying it on thick tonight, aren't you? Jake laughed, shaking his head. It's not a line, Emma. It's the truth. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them shifting. Emma glanced at the tiramisu sitting untouched on the table and grabbed 2 spoons. All right, she said, holding one out to him. You get half. Don't make me regret sharing. Jake took the spoon with a mock serious expression. I promise to be fair. Mostly. As they dug into the dessert, their laughter returned, lighter and freer than it had been in weeks. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to the connection they'd once shared. As they packed up the remains of their impromptu dinner, Jake paused, his expression thoughtful. Emma, he said quietly, thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm going to do everything I can to earn it. She looked at him, her voice soft. Don't make promises you can't keep, Jake. I won't, he said firmly. Not this time. As they walked away from the park together, the city lights shining around them, Emma felt something she hadn't in weeks, a sense of possibility. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a step towards something that felt real. And that was enough for now. The grand opening of Emma's restaurant, Blissful Bites, was a day she had dreamed about for years. The building was modest but inviting, with wide glass windows that offered a view of the cozy interior. Warm lighting bathed the space in a golden glow, and the scent of freshly baked bread and sizzling meat wafted into the street. A small crowd had already gathered outside, chatting excitedly as they waited for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Inside, Emma moved through the restaurant with nervous energy, adjusting chairs, straightening napkins, and making sure every detail was perfect. Her best friend Maria was there, as always, offering moral support. Relax, Maria said, plopping onto one of the padded chairs. The place looks amazing, and everyone already loves your food. This is going to be a hit. Emma smiled, though her fingers still fidgeted with the edge of her apron. I just want everything to be perfect. This is my chance to show people what I've been working for. Maria leaned closer, lowering her voice. And to show a certain someone who's been helping behind the scenes? Emma sighed, rolling her eyes. Don't start. I'm just saying, Maria teased. He's been bending over backward to make this happen. Maybe it's time you cut him some slack. Before Emma could respond, the door opened, and Jake walked in, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers and daisies. He looked every bit like the man she had first met, casual, approachable, and genuinely happy to see her. Am I interrupting? He asked, holding out the bouquet with a sheepish smile. Maria smirked and stood up. Not at all. I was just leaving. She winked at Emma before slipping out, leaving them alone. Jake stepped closer, handing Emma the flowers. These reminded me of you, bright and warm. Emma took them, her fingers brushing his for a moment. Thank you, she said softly, setting the bouquet on the counter. They're beautiful. Jake glanced around the restaurant, his smile widening. This place, it's incredible, Emma. You've outdone yourself. Thanks, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. But I couldn't have done it without your help. Jake shrugged, his tone light. All I did was push some paperwork and make a few calls. The rest was all you. Emma's gaze softened. Jake, I mean it. You believed in me when I wasn't sure I could do this. That means more than you know. He looked at her, his expression serious. I've always believed in you, Emma, from the moment I met you. The air between them grew heavy, and Emma felt her heart race. Before she could respond, the sound of cheering outside broke the moment. It's time, she said, her voice trembling slightly. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a blur of applause, laughter, and heartfelt speeches. Emma stood at the entrance, cutting the red ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors, her smile so wide it hurt her cheeks. The crowd poured into the restaurant, filling the space with warmth and excitement. Jake stayed in the background, watching as Emma greeted guests and served her signature shawarma. Her joy was infectious, and he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Maria sidled up to him, nudging his shoulder. You're staring, she said with a smirk. Jake chuckled. Can you blame me? Look at her. Maria followed his gaze, her own smile softening. She deserves this. And maybe she deserves you too, if you don't screw it up again. Jake's expression turned serious. I don't plan to. As the night wound down and the last customers left, Emma found herself alone with Jake in the quiet restaurant. She sat at one of the tables, exhausted but happy, while Jake brought over 2 glasses of wine. To blissful bites, he said, raising his glass. Emma clinked hers against his, her smile tired but genuine. To second chances. They sipped in silence for a moment before Jake set his glass down, leaning forward. Emma, I need to say something. She looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. What is it? Jake hesitated, his gaze unwavering. I don't just believe in you because of this restaurant or because of what you've done for me. I believe in you because you're the most incredible person I've ever met. You've changed the way I see the world, and I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. Emma's throat tightened, and she set her glass down, her hands trembling. Jake, I'm not asking for an answer right now, he said quickly, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I just needed you to know how I feel. Whatever happens next is up to you. She stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. For so long, she had guarded her heart, afraid to let him in again. But now, looking at him, she realized she didn't want to keep him at arm's length anymore. Taking a deep breath, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Jake, I don't know what the future holds, but if you're willing to take this one step at a time, so am I. Jake's smile was slow and warm, his relief palpable. One step at a time, he agreed, his fingers curling around hers. As they sat together in the soft glow of the restaurant, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning, and that was enough. The days following the restaurant's grand opening were a whirlwind of success. Blissful Bites quickly became a favorite spot in the city, with customers raving about Emma's food and the warm, welcoming atmosphere she had worked so hard to create. Every day brought new challenges, but Emma faced them head-on, her confidence growing with each passing moment. Jake, true to his word, became a steady presence in her life. He didn't overstep, nor did he try to solve her problems for her. Instead, he supported her quietly, offering advice when asked and being her biggest cheerleader when things got tough. One evening, after the dinner rush had died down, Emma locked the front door and leaned against it, letting out a tired sigh. Jake was sitting at the counter, helping her tally up the day's sales. Long day? He asked, looking up with a smile. Long but good, Emma replied, crossing the room to join him. We sold out of everything again. I'm starting to think I need a bigger kitchen. Jake chuckled, setting down the notebook. That's a good problem to have. Emma nodded, her gaze drifting toward the dining area. The tables were empty now, but the memory of the laughter and chatter from earlier lingered. I can't believe this is real sometimes, she said softly. That this place is mine. Jake leaned forward, resting his arms on the counter. You built this, Emma, from the ground up. You should be proud. She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. I am, but I couldn't have done it without you. Jake shook his head. All I did was give you a little push. The rest was all you. Emma reached out, placing her hand over his. You gave me more than a push, Jake. You believed in me when I wasn't sure I could do this. That means everything. He met her gaze, his voice quiet but firm. I'll always believe in you, Emma. The air between them shifted, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, Jake leaned closer. Emma hesitated only briefly before closing the distance, their lips meeting in a gentle, heartfelt kiss. When they pulled away, Jake smiled, his eyes warm. I've been wanting to do that for a long time. Emma laughed, her cheeks flushing. You're not the only one. Over the next few weeks, their relationship grew stronger. They found a balance, working together as partners in every sense of the word. Jake brought his business acumen to the table, helping Emma streamline operations and plan for expansion. Emma, in turn, reminded Jake of the importance of staying grounded and finding joy in the simple things. One evening, as they sat in the restaurant after closing, Jake pulled out a folder from his bag. What's this? Emma asked, eyeing it curiously. A proposal, Jake said, sliding it across the table. For your second location. Emma's eyes widened as she opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. You're serious? Completely, Jake said. You've got something special here, Emma. People love your food, and more importantly, they love you. Expanding is the logical next step. Emma bit her lip, excitement and nervousness warring inside her. This is a lot to think about. Jake reached across the table, taking her hand. You don't have to decide right now. But when you're ready, I'll be here to help you every step of the way. Her smile softened, and she squeezed his hand. Thank you, Jake, for everything. As the months passed, Emma's restaurant flourished, and plans for a second location began to take shape. Jake officially stepped back into his role as CEO of Hastings Tech, but made it clear that his heart was firmly rooted in Emma's world. On a quiet evening, as they stood together in the kitchen of Blissful Bites, Emma turned to Jake. her expression thoughtful. Do you ever miss your old life? She asked. Jake shook his head, his gaze steady. Not a bit. This is the life I want, with you. Emma smiled, leaning into him. Good, because I'm not letting you go. Jake wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Deal. In that moment, as the city buzzed quietly outside and the warm glow of the restaurant surrounded them, Emma realized that she had found not only her dream, but also the partner she had been searching for all along. Together, they were building a future filled with love, trust, and endless possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.